You wake up, but something's wrong, not outside, inside. There's no tragedy, no fight, no sudden loss, just a silent dissonance, like your soul is leaking out through the cracks in your smile. At 40, what collapses isn't life. It's the illusion you mistook for identity. You still go to work. You still pay the bills. You still answer messages, but you no longer believe in the character you're playing. And that's the fracture, when the mask begins to rot and the face underneath is too unfamiliar to trust. You were taught to perform, to be strong, to keep moving. You became who you needed to be, to survive, to belong, to be admired. And slowly, invisibly, that survival costume fused with your skin. But now, something's unraveling. You laugh, but the laughter doesn't reach your eyes. You succeed, but the victories feel hollow. You rest, but the exhaustion never leaves. This isn't burnout. This isn't depression. This is grief. Grief for a version of you that never truly lived. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we construct to play a role in society. But he warned, the persona is what someone is not, but what others think he is. And when that fragile construction begins to crumble, what's left? Not clarity, not peace, but an unbearable question. Who am I? Without all the pretending. You look in the mirror, and the reflection stares back like a stranger. The voice in your head no longer sounds like you. Or maybe it never did. It's not madness. It's awakening, a painful, necessary disintegration. The world calls it a midlife crisis, as if it was something trivial, as if mourning your own illusion could be reduced to a cliché. But you know better. You feel it in your bones. This isn't a breakdown. It's a reckoning. The persona is dying, and something real, something raw, something long silenced, is starting to breathe underneath. The question that opens the abyss is simple, terrifying. If you strip away everything you pretend to be, what's left? Let's begin there. You were admired, maybe even envied. You did everything right, or at least everything that was expected. You became competent, composed, reliable. You played the role so well that even you forgot it was a performance. But now, it's slipping, quietly, like a building losing its foundation while the walls still stand. You feel the shift in small things, a reluctance to wake up, a strange heaviness in ordinary conversations, a blank stare while holding everything you once wanted. What's wrong? Nothing. And that's what makes it worse. No one sees you mourning, because what you're grieving isn't visible. It's not a person, not a job, not a relationship. It's the collapse of a role, the persona you crafted to be worthy of love. That mask, once your armor, now feels like a tomb. And the tragedy is, there's no funeral for this kind of death. No goodbye, no eulogy, just an invisible ache that stretches across your chest at 3 a.m., whispering, I can't do this anymore. But what is this? Pretending. Pretending to care about things that don't move you. Pretending to enjoy what drains you. Pretending that the smile means joy, when it's actually a form of surrender. The collapse at 40 isn't failure, it's truth, finally breaking through the layers of performance. It's your soul, tired of being dressed for someone else's script. But your mind doesn't know how to interpret it. It panics, it diagnoses, it searches for reasons. Maybe I'm depressed, maybe I'm ungrateful, maybe I'm broken. No, you're not broken. You're just exhausted from being a character that was never really you. This grief has no name, but it's real, and it deserves space. Because only when the mask falls can something real begin to breathe. Most people talk about imposter syndrome like it's a fear of being exposed, as if deep down, you don't believe you're good enough, and one day the world will find out. But what if the real fear isn't being discovered by others? What if it's being discovered by yourself? At 40, something inverts. You no longer feel like a fraud in the eyes of others. You feel like a fraud in your own. You walk through the rooms of your life, your home, your work, your relationships, and something feels off, like you're visiting a museum of a person you pretended to be. You remember your achievements, your confidence, your drive, and a question slowly begins to burn. Was that really me? The shame you carry doesn't come from failure. It comes from performance, from the slow realization that your competence, your success, your perfect responses were all part of a silent survival strategy. You weren't lying to manipulate the world. You were lying to protect yourself from it. And now, the consequences arrive. Not in the form of punishment, but in the form of collapse. You sit in a quiet room and feel like the actor has left the stage, but the costume is still warm. You did what you were supposed to. You were what they needed. But were you ever really there? The collapse is exactly this. Not the fall from grace, but the fall into reality. Into the painful awareness that the life you built may have been built by someone trying to be accepted, not someone trying to be whole. It's not that you weren't enough. It's that you were never allowed to be incomplete. And now, something deeper wants to emerge, but it needs you to admit what you've denied for decades. That maybe you've never truly met yourself. You didn't choose the mask. You inherited it. Maybe it started when you were still a child, learning that being loved meant being useful. That affection came with conditions. That silence was safer than truth. So you adapted. You learned to be good, to be impressive, to be invisible when necessary. You edited yourself until the version others accepted became the only one you could recognize. And it worked. You survived. But adaptation has a cost. A subtle, long-term amputation of the self. Each time you swallowed the truth to avoid rejection, a part of you dimmed. Each time you smiled when you wanted to scream, the gap between your soul and your face widened. The persona is born this way, not from vanity, but from necessity. It's the armor forged in moments when being authentic felt dangerous, but over time, the armor hardened. It stopped being a defense and became a cage. And now, at 40, the body begins to revolt. It carries the weight of years lived out of sync. The tightness in your chest, the fatigue that doesn't go away, the strange ache you can't explain to anyone. It's not weakness, it's memory. Your body remembers every time you disappeared to keep the peace. Every time you played strong to avoid being left behind. Every time you were praised for a version of you that felt like a ghost. The crisis isn't madness. It's a call from the child you once were, asking if it's finally safe to stop pretending. And for the first time, you realize you became exceptional at surviving, but forgot how to feel. It's a quiet nausea, not loud, not dramatic, just a growing revulsion toward everything that once seemed like progress. The job, the schedule, the morning coffee, the evening silence, the predictable rhythm that once gave you stability now tastes like dust in your mouth. And it confuses you because you've done everything right. You've checked every box. You've built the life that others admire, but no longer want to live. That feeling, it's not laziness, it's not ingratitude, it's not failure. It's your body revolting against a life that no longer holds your soul. Sometimes what you call routine is just a ritual of avoidance. A beautifully decorated cage, a repetition of movements that once made sense but now echo with emptiness. You used to find purpose in your calendar. Now you dread opening it. You used to feel pride in your achievements. Now they feel like props in a story you didn't write. And beneath that fatigue, that procrastination, that sudden lack of motivation, there's a deeper truth. You're not tired because you've done too much. You're tired because you've abandoned yourself in everything you do. This isn't about starting over. It's about recognizing that the life you built to feel safe has become the very thing suffocating you. The disgust is not your enemy. It's your compass. It's the body's final attempt to wake you from a narrative that no longer fits. And when you finally listen, everything begins to crack. You laugh, you nod. You perform the gestures of happiness so well that no one suspects. But deep inside, something watches. detached, unmoved. It's not sadness, it's dissonance. A growing gap between the face you show and the person you've lost sight of. Joy becomes a scene you reenact, not a state you inhabit. Like wearing a costume that used to fit, but now clings to you like a lie. There are moments when the laughter dies and the silence returns, heavier, denser. And in that silence, a realization creeps in. You don't recognize yourself anymore. The persona, that elegant, articulate, smiling mask, was always built for the gaze of others. It was designed to win approval, to hide the trembling underneath, to make you seem okay. But now the war isn't outside, it's within. The pain doesn't come from lack, it comes from the performance. You go through the motions, the dinners, the social gestures, the rituals of a life that once had meaning. But the feeling is gone, like an echo of something that used to be real. And it leaves you wondering, if you've been performing for so long, where did the real one go? At 40, many feel a strange kind of muteness, not because they lack words, but because the words have no home inside them anymore. The silence isn't empty. It's crowded with all the things you never said, never felt, never allowed. This is the stage where the soul begins to protest, not with screams, but with stillness that hurts. And when even your joy feels fake, you know something real is trying to break through. You look in the mirror, and what you see isn't you. It's the version you've maintained for years, the careful hair, the trained smile, the subtle choices that say, "I'm still in control." But beneath the surface, something shatters, because the reflection no longer comforts, it demands. You're not looking at a person, you're looking at a symbol, a carefully curated identity assembled to be admired, accepted, envied, and now it's become your cage. You thought the prison would have bars. You didn't expect it to wear your face. You've spent years tending to your image, not out of vanity, but survival. Reputation became a mask you couldn't remove. Self-worth became tied to perception, and little by little, the image devoured the self. Now every decision feels like maintenance. What to wear, how to speak, when to be seen. You're not just living, you're editing constantly. The pressure is silent but suffocating, because the more you invest in the persona, the more you fear what's underneath it. And still, something inside whispers, "This is not who I am." But you don't know what waits on the other side of that confession. You've been performing so long, even silence feels like betrayal. This is the mirror crisis. Not the fear of being seen, but the fear that you've never truly been. And it's here, in this unbearable reflection, that the truth breaks through. The image you spent a lifetime perfecting is the very thing keeping you from becoming real. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You revisit old photos, old places, old versions of yourself, but instead of warmth, you feel a strange coldness, like flipping through someone else's story. The smile looks familiar, but distant. The joy, rehearsed. The victories, blurred by something you can't quite name. It's not amnesia. It's alienation. You remember the events, the timelines, the facts, but the emotion is missing, or worse, it feels fake. This is the inverted nostalgia, not a longing for what was, but a mourning for what never truly happened, because you were there physically, but emotionally you were surviving, performing, disconnected. You don't miss the past, you grieve it, not because it's gone, but because you were never fully present in it. The roles you played, the dreams you chased, the identities you wore, all of it feels like it belonged to someone who resembled you, but wasn't really you. And that realization is sharp. It cuts through the illusion that time alone brings meaning. Time passed, years passed, but did you? Or were you always half hidden, half guarded, half awake, waiting for permission to exist without the mask? This is the grief of midlife, not just aging, not just change. It's standing in front of your memories and whispering, "I missed my own life." And it's a pain that doesn't scream. It lingers, quiet, unresolved, until you stop running from the void and start listening to what it's been trying to show you all along. You think you're falling apart, but what's actually breaking is the scaffolding around your soul. The collapse at 40 isn't the end, it's the threshold, the moment the performance crumbles and what was buried begins to breathe. It feels like chaos, because it is, not the chaos of destruction, but of reassembly, of something ancient returning from exile. This is not about reinvention, not another version of success, not a new label or polished goal. This is about returning to the part of you that existed before the applause, before the conditioning, before you learned to survive by disappearing. Carl Jung called this individuation, a descent into the shadow to integrate what you've silenced. It's not pretty, it's not public, and it's not immediate. Rebirth is not a spectacle, it's a quiet ritual. It happens in the solitude you once feared, in the moments of deep disgust, in the refusal to keep playing dead. You reach a point where you can no longer tolerate your own performance, and in that refusal, something sacred ignites. You no longer need to be admired. You no longer need to be right. You no longer need to explain. You just want to be real, to feel again, to exist again, to say, without shame, "I don't know who I am, but now I want to find out." That moment, that surrender, that's the beginning, not of a new you, but of the one you left behind when pretending became a survival strategy. And now, it's time to come home. At 40, the world still expects you to keep going, to maintain, to produce, to smile, to say, "I'm fine." But something inside is begging you to stop, not because you're weak, but because you're finally strong enough to face the void. The persona is dying. That carefully constructed identity, made of expectations, performance, and silent desperation, is collapsing under the weight of its own falseness. And what's left? Emptiness. Not the kind that destroys, the kind that reveals. The philosopher Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But before the star comes, the silence, the abyss, the unbearable stillness of finally being without a script. This emptiness isn't a curse. It's a passage. It's the moment when all external definitions fall away, when no title, no role, no appearance can rescue you from your own gaze. And that's where the liberation begins. Because once you stop pretending, you also stop performing for love, for approval, for worth. You begin to sit with yourself without flinching. The pain you feel isn't punishment. It's the labor of a life unlived. And through that labor comes birth, the real kind. Not as an idea, not as a performance, but as a quiet, grounded presence that no longer needs an audience. You are not your mask. You are not the story that pleased others. You are the space underneath, vast, unfinished, and painfully alive. It's not too late. It's only too late to keep pretending.